Welcome to a journey into one of the most unsettling cases ever recorded in the history of the American Northwest. Before we begin, I invite you to share in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day or night you're listening to this narration. We're always curious to know just how far these stories travel. In the winter of 1883, 27 men set out into the dense forests of northern Montana's Bitterroot Range. At that time, the logging and fur trade were booming, drawing ambitious men into the wilderness with promises of fortune. Their encampment, established near what we now call Blackwater Creek, was intended to be a base for an entire season of trapping and hunting. By all accounts, they were well prepared. They had the supplies, the equipment, and the survival experience to endure. The expedition was led by Jeremiah Hulkcom, a man who had organized similar ventures for more than 15 years without a single incident. Yet despite these favorable conditions, only 9 men would ever return from those woods. The disappearance of 18 men remains one of the most baffling mass vanishings in American frontier history. No bodies were ever recovered. No conclusive explanation was ever found. And the 9 survivors, those who did emerge, refused to speak of what happened during their 3 months in the wilderness. What follows is a reconstruction of events, pieced together from fragments of journals, newspaper reports, territorial records, and the rare testimonies that surfaced years later, when the survivors believed no one was listening anymore. The official explanation, as recorded in the Montana Territorial Register on April 17, 1883, blamed the losses on harsh winter conditions and possible conflicts with native tribes. But weather records show that winter was unusually mild, and the local Salish people had long maintained peaceful relations with trappers. Clearly, something else happened in those woods, something the survivors took deliberate steps to conceal. This is the story of the Blackwater Creek hunting camp, and the terrible secret that remained buried for nearly a century. Mill Creek, Montana Territory, was a modest settlement in 1882. It consisted of little more than a general store, a sawmill that gave the town its name, 2 saloons, and a scattering of wooden buildings serving as homes and small businesses. Surrounded by mountains on every side, Mill Creek attracted men chasing fortune in lumber, furs, and occasionally gold. The town's population rose and fell with the seasons, swelling in spring and summer, then thinning out as winter closed the mountain passes. But some saw opportunity in the harsh Montana winters, when fur-bearing animals grew their thickest coats and commanded the highest prices. Jeremiah Hulkcom was one of those men. At 53, Hulkcom had spent most of his life in the territories. Originally from Pennsylvania, he moved west as a young man, working first as a surveyor before establishing himself as an organizer of hunting and trapping expeditions. By 1882, his reputation in Mill Creek and nearby settlements was well established. He was known as a meticulous planner, a strict disciplinarian, and, perhaps most importantly, a man who always brought his teams back alive. The Mill Creek Gazette from November 1882 even carried an advertisement placed by Hulkcom, calling for experienced men to join his upcoming winter expedition. 3 months' work, equal share of profits, previous wilderness experience required. Inquire at Wilson's General Store. According to store ledgers preserved in the territorial archives, 26 men were eventually selected from the applicants. They range in age from 22 to 48. Most had worked with Hulkcom before or came recommended by his associates, though a few were newcomers to the territory, bringing valuable skills or resources to the group. The expedition's goal was primarily commercial, to trap fur-bearing animals and to scout potential logging sites for the spring cutting season. On December 3, 1882, the expedition departed from Mill Creek, 27 men in total, traveling in 8 wagons, each loaded with enough provisions to last through the winter and into spring. The territorial records list their names: Jeremiah Hulkcom, Augustus Reed, Samuel Perkins, Thomas Fletcher, William Norton, Benjamin Lewis, Charles Winston, Jacob Miller, Isaac Thompson, Frank Wilson, Daniel Roberts, Joseph Davis, Henry Adams, George Stewart, Edward Collins, Michael Williams, Robert Taylor, John Anderson, James Martin, David Brown, Richard Evans, Christopher Hughes, Paul Mitchell, Peter Schmidt, Frederick Cooper, Howard Griffin, and Eli Watson. Of those men, only 9 would return: Hulkcom, Reed, Perkins, Fletcher, Norton, Lewis, Winston, Miller, and Thompson. The rest would vanish without a trace. The journey to their chosen hunting grounds lasted 11 days. They followed established trails, crossing the Clark Fork River before turning northwest into less charted territory. The terrain grew harsher: dense pine and fir forests, steep ridges, narrow valleys cut by swift, icy streams. According to Hulkcom's journal, after the 4th day they encountered no other people, only abandoned trapper cabins and occasional prospectors' hole marked the wilderness. On December 14th, they reached their destination, a flat stretch of valley where 3 streams joined together, forming what Hulkcom named Blackwater Creek, after the dark, tannin-stained waters. The site was well chosen: abundant water, natural shelter from the winds, plentiful game trails in the snow, and flat ground suitable for a large camp. They immediately began work on their winter quarters. Teams were assigned, some cutting timber, others clearing land, and others raising the first cabins. Hulkcom's journal from December 15th reads, "Work progresses satisfactorily. All men contribute according to their abilities. Weather holds fair. First cabin nearly complete by sundown. Expect to have all men under proper shelter within the week. If conditions remain favorable, by December 21st the camp was largely complete. 7 cabins stood arranged in a rough circle, with a larger central structure serving as mess hall and meeting place. Around the perimeter, they built a stockade of sharpened logs, not to fend off human attackers, but to keep large predators away and prevent pack animals from wandering. It was standard procedure for wilderness encampments of the era. Hulkcom wasted no time in establishing order. Men were assigned to hunting parties, trapping lines, camp maintenance, and rotating guard duty. His journal from this period reflects the same methodical mind that had earned him his reputation. Detailed supply inventories, daily records of hunting yields, maps of trap lines radiating outward from camp, and careful notations of weather conditions. For the first 5 weeks, nothing significant happened. The men settled into routine. Trap lines were checked daily. Hunting parties brought in deer, elk, and the occasional moose to supplement their rations. Pelts began to pile up: beaver, marten, fox, and, most prized of all, river otter from surrounding streams. Hulkcom's entries during this stretch are almost mundane. Notes on weather, hunting successes, and minor disputes. On January 2nd, 1883, he recorded, "Norton and Schmidt engaged in heated words over a card game, separated them before matters escalated. Otherwise, spirits remain high. Trap lines yielding satisfactory results. Expect first shipment of pelts ready by month's end." There was no sign of the horror that was about to unfold. The men were not completely isolated. Hulkcom had arranged for accumulated pelts to be transported to the nearest trading post, a 5-day journey by horseback. There, the furs would be exchanged for fresh supplies, and any necessary messages to Mill Creek could be delivered. The first such journey was planned for late January, with Wilson and Evans designated as couriers. They never made that trip. January 21st, 1883, marks the first anomaly. Hulkcom's journal that day contains a curious note. Reed reports unusual findings along the northern ridge, claims to have discovered abandoned camp, no sign of occupants, peculiar markings on trees surrounding site. Will investigate tomorrow if weather permits. The next entry is brief. Bad weather prevented the investigation. Reed, however, grew agitated. He claimed to have heard voices in the forest during his night watch. Hulkcom dismissed it as exhaustion, assigning Reed to lighter camp duties for 3 days. But 3 days later, Hulkcom recorded that Reed continued speaking of voices that now called his name. Hulkcom examined him for fever or sickness, but found him physically sound, though mentally distressed. Other men began avoiding his company. Then On January 26th, reports came from two others, Stewart and Brown. While checking a northern trap line, they too described strange sounds, whispering that seemed to follow them, yet always just beyond comprehension. Hulkcom noted both men were reliable, not given to flights of imagination. He ordered from then on that no one travel in pairs, only in groups of 3. The next day brought darker news. Schmidt failed to return from his trap line. Cooper and Mitchell went to search. By nightfall, they had not returned either. On January 28th, Cooper and Mitchell located Schmidt's last line. The traps were undisturbed. There was no sign of Schmidt, but there were tracks in the snow, bare footprints, Hulkcom thought, though not resembling any animal sign he had ever encountered. The men grew uneasy. By January 29th, Cooper himself was missing. Mitchell claimed the two had briefly separated during the search for Schmidt. When he called out, Cooper did not answer. A new search party found nothing. The camp was now down 3 men. Hulkcom ordered all activity conducted strictly in pairs, no man to leave camp alone. By February 1st, his journal betrays growing concern. Men reported strange sounds from the forest at night, describing them as voices without words. Hulkcom tried to explain it as wind echoing through rock formations, but he doubled the night watch rotation nonetheless. A pattern was forming. Men vanished 1 or 2 at a time, without struggle, without warning, often after only a brief separation from their companions. The psychological toll on survivors was devastating. Hulkcom documented increasing tension, bitter arguments, sleeplessness, and what he called nervous disorders. On February 3rd, Mitchell reappeared, disoriented, confused, found about a mile from camp. He claimed he had been lured away by familiar voices. A medical examination revealed no injuries, but extreme exhaustion. He spoke a door in the cave, but became agitated when pressed for details. Hulkcom sedated him with whiskey and laudanum. 2 days later, the expedition unraveled further. On February 5th, Hulkcom wrote, "Mitchell found dead this morning. No apparent cause. Body cold. Features frozen in expression of extreme terror. Men insisted burial outside camp perimeter despite frozen ground. Took 4 hours to dig adequate grave. Roberts led prayer service. Morale lowest yet. That same day, Watson, Hughes, and Taylor failed to return from a hunting expedition. Griffin and Anderson volunteered to search despite the growing darkness. By midnight, none of them had returned. The camp was now down 8 men. The remaining survivors refused to disperse to individual cabins, insisting instead on gathering in the central hall. Hulkcom reluctantly agreed, for morale, if nothing else. A significant gap follows in the journal. No entries between February 5th and February 18th. When the writing resumes, it is radically different. The normally neat, measure handwriting is shaky, rushed. Dates are inconsistent, sometimes marked only as day or night. One entry reads simply, "They watch from between the trees. They are not what they appear to be." Another 7 gone. They went only for water. The creek lies barely 200 yards from camp. We heard no struggle, no cries for help. They simply vanished between one moment and the next. Those of us remaining refused to speak of it, as if silence itself might protect us. That is one of the final entries in Hulkcom's journal, believed to date from late February. It concludes, "We leave at first light, the 9 of us who remain. We burn everything we cannot carry. We tell ourselves we will reach Mill Creek in 10 days if we maintain steady pace. We tell ourselves we will be safe in daylight. We tell ourselves many things." What truly occurred during those missing 2 weeks in February remains unknown. Hulkcom's journal offers no answers. Later testimonies from survivors were contradictory and often incoherent. The only other surviving document from this period is a fragment of what appears to have been the personal diary of Benjamin Lewis, recovered among his belongings when the survivors returned to Mill Creek. It contains just 3 short entries, undated. The singing comes from beyond the ridge now. Mitchell says it comes from the cave, but there is no cave. Mitchell is not well. None of us are well. Reed says they're coming closer. Says they wear our missing friends' faces like masks. Says he can see what hides behind the masks when they blink. He won't tell us what he sees. Hulkcom ordered us not to speak of it. Says speaking gives it power. But silence hasn't protected us either. We are 19 now. Tomorrow there will be fewer. The 9 survivors emerged from the forest on March 12, 1883. According to the Mill Creek Gazette, they did not arrive together, but scattered. First Reed and Miller, stumbling into town just after dawn. Winston and Thompson followed by midday. Others arrived in the hours after, and finally, Hulkcom himself appeared at nightfall. Their physical state was poor, though not critical. They showed signs of exposure, malnutrition, and exhaustion, consistent with a harsh winter trek, but bore no frostbite, no serious injuries, no wounds to explain the loss of their 18 companions. Their mental state, however, was another matter. The Gazette of March 14th, 1883 reported, "The men appear greatly altered from when they departed 3 months past. They start at sudden sounds. They avoid direct gaze. They speak little, and when pressed for details, provide accounts so varied as to suggest either deliberate concealment or confusion of the mind born of ordeal. Indeed, their accounts differed so wildly that authorities grew suspicious. Reed claimed the group had been scattered in a blizzard. Miller insisted there had been no blizzard, but an attack by an unidentified mountain tribe. Winston and Thompson refused to speak at all. The others offered inconsistent, often contradictory versions of events. The only point of agreement was this: 18 men were dead. How, why, and where no one could say. Concerned about possible foul play, the territorial governor dispatched Sheriff James Blackwood, grandfather of Theodore Blackwood, who would later revisit this case, to question the men and determine whether charges should be filed. The sheriff's report, preserved in territorial records, concludes, while inconsistencies in their accounts raise suspicions, no physical evidence of wrongdoing exists. The men appear traumatized rather than guilty. I recommend medical attention over legal action. Doctors who examined the survivors noted disturbing symptoms. Dr. Martin Whitaker wrote, subjects exhibit extreme aversion to darkness, insist lamps remain lit through the night, react with disproportionate terror to certain sounds, particularly wind through trees or distant animal calls. Several report identical nightmares of being summoned into the forest by familiar voices. Recommend continued observation. On March 20th, the governor ordered a recovery expedition guided by Lewis and Fletcher. Yet, according to the official report, they were unable to relocate the camp. Both guides appeared strangely disoriented in terrain they should have known well. After 10 days of fruitless searching, the team returned empty-handed. This only fueled speculation. The Gazette of April 2nd asked, were our guides deliberately misleading the recovery party? If so, what horrors are they concealing? If not, what phenomenon could so disorient men who had successfully navigated the same terrain mere weeks earlier? A second, larger expedition was dispatched in June of 1883. This one located the site. They found only the charred remnants of cabins, consistent with Hulkcom's final journal entry about burning everything before departure. No bodies, no belongings, no sign of violence or natural disaster. The official report simply noted, site appears abandoned in haste, but without disorder. Cause unknown. Unofficially, there was more. The expedition's cartographer, Alexander Reynolds, kept his own private journal. In it he wrote, located unusual cave formation approximately 1 mile north of campsite. Entrance partially concealed by fallen timber. Interior walls covered in markings unlike any I have encountered. Not Indian pictographs. Not minor symbols. Not natural. Geometric patterns that seem to shift when viewed from different angles. 2 men reported hearing voices from the depths. Expedition leader ordered caves sealed with dynamite. Detonation successful. entrance completely collapsed. After their return, the 9 survivors scattered. Few remained in Montana Territory. Records show Augustus Reed relocated to Oregon. Samuel Perkins moved to California. The others dispersed across the country, maintaining no contact with one another according to available records. Jeremiah Hulkcom remained in Mill Creek briefly before departing for Seattle in late 1883. His journal, which he carried out of the forest, was donated to the Territorial Archives under the condition it remained sealed for 75 years after his death. It was finally opened in 1960. Hulkcom, having passed away in 1885, reportedly by his own hand, took most of the mystery with him. It might have ended there, relegated to local folklore, had it not been for Theodore Blackwood, a graduate student at the University of Washington. In 1962, while researching frontier settlements for his doctoral thesis, Blackwood encountered Hulkcom's journal. He became obsessed with the Blackwater Creek incident. His research notes, preserved in the university archives, document a methodical investigation spanning nearly a year. He tracked down county records, newspaper archives, church registries, and personal correspondence related to the survivors and their descendants. Most significantly, he conducted interviews with still living relatives of the 9 men who had emerged from the forest in 1883. These interviews revealed disturbing patterns. Martha Reed, granddaughter of Augustus Reed, reported that her grandfather never slept in darkness and kept loaded rifles at every door and window until his death in 1884, just a year after his return. William Perkins, grandson of Samuel Perkins, recounted family stories of his grandfather's episodes, periods where he would insist that friends long dead were watching him from the corners of the room, wearing faces that didn't quite fit. Blackwood's research also revealed that of the 9 survivors, 7 died within 2 years of their return, most by suicide or under questionable circumstances. Augustus Reed shot himself in October 1884. Samuel Perkins drowned in the Sacramento River in January 1885, though witnesses reported he was a strong swimmer. Thomas Fletcher was found hanging in his barn in March 1884, with what the coroner described as an expression of extraordinary terror on his face. Only Jacob Miller and Isaac Thompson lived to old age, both becoming recluses in their later years. Miller died of natural causes in 1927 at the age of 76. Thompson outlived them all, passing away in 1931 at 82. In Thompson's personal papers, discovered after his death by his son Edward Thompson, Blackwood found a sealed envelope marked to be burned unread upon my death. Edward Thompson had retained the envelope, but honored his father's wish not to read its contents. Eventually, Blackwood persuaded him that the historical value of its contents justified breaking this promise. Inside was a detailed account of what Thompson claimed had occurred at Blackwater Creek. The document, dated January 3, 1930, begins, "I am the last living witness to what happened at Blackwater Creek in the winter of 1883. As death approaches, I feel compelled to record the truth, though I have spent my life concealing it. Let this account serve as both confession and warning." According to Thompson, the trouble began not with the disappearance of Schmidt, as Hulkcom's journal suggests, but several days earlier. Thompson writes, "It was Reed who found the cave, not an abandoned camp, as Hulkcom recorded, a cave, its entrance half hidden by fallen timber. Inside, Reed discovered peculiar markings carved into the stone walls. Not Indian signs, not miners' markings. Something older, something none of us recognized. Reed brought others to see his discovery." Thompson continues, "7 of us entered the cave with Reed. Hulkcom refused to go, saying he had trapping lines to check. Inside, we found the markings extended deep into the mountain. Fletcher, who had some schooling, said they resembled no language he knew, but had a mathematical precision to them. Roberts noticed they seemed to change when viewed from different angles, as if shifting under our gaze. Thompson describes how they discovered a chamber deep within the cave system, the walls open into a space larger than our mess hall. At its center stood what Roberts called a doorframe with no door, a perfect rectangle of stone standing unsupported on the cave floor. Beyond it, only the far wall of the chamber was visible. Yet something about that frame made us uneasy. The air around it seemed to waver, like heat rising from summer rocks. What happened next, according to Thompson, defies rational explanation. Schmidt was closest to the frame. He reached toward it, not touching, merely pointing. Said he felt a cold draft coming through. Then he stepped forward as if to pass around the frame. Instead, he passed through it. One moment visible, the next gone. No sound, no flash of light. Simply gone, as if he'd never been. Panic ensued. The men fled the cave, returned to camp. They told Hulkcom and the others what they had witnessed. Most dismissed it as a prank or hysteria. Cooper and Mitchell, however, insisted on returning to investigate, convinced Schmidt was playing an elaborate joke. They never returned. Thompson's account grows increasingly disturbing from this point. He describes how, over the following weeks, men continued to vanish, not only from the cave, which they had sealed shut with felled timber, but from the camp itself. They were taken in moments of solitude. A man would step behind a cabin for privacy or walk to the edge of the clearing to relieve himself and never return. No tracks leading away, no signs of struggle. More terrifying were the voices. Thompson writes, "We began to hear them after the first week. Familiar voices calling from the forest. Schmidt's voice, Cooper's voice, each man who had vanished, calling to those who remained, asking for help, begging to be let back into camp. We maintained strict discipline. No one responded. No one ventured out after dark. But each night the voices drew closer. Each night they sounded less human. Most disturbing of all was Thompson's description of what they began to see at the forest's edge. They looked like our missing companions standing just beyond the firelight, but wrong somehow. Their proportions subtly altered, their movements too fluid or too rigid, their faces expressionless, even when calling out in apparent distress. And their eyes, when the firelight caught their eyes, they reflected. Their eyes reflected back, not red as an animal's might, but a deep, impenetrable black. By February, according to Thompson, the survivors had split into factions. One group, led by Winston, argued they should abandon the camp immediately. Another, under Roberts, insisted they must find and recover their missing companions. Hulkcom maintained they should wait for better weather before attempting the journey back to civilization. The breaking point came when Roberts and his faction ventured into the forest one morning, armed and determined to locate the missing men. They were 15 when they left camp, Thompson writes. By nightfall, none had returned. We heard their screams throughout the afternoon, distant at first, then closer, until they were abruptly silenced. When darkness fell, 17 figures stood at the forest's edge. Our missing companions, Roberts among them, all standing motionless, watching the camp, all wearing the same empty expression. The 9 who ultimately survived made their escape the following morning. They fled in haste, taking only minimal supplies and abandoning much of their equipment. Thompson's account becomes fragmented here, describing a desperate 10-day journey through the forest. We did not travel as a group, he writes. That was our salvation. We scattered, each man making his own way, using the sun and stars to maintain a southeastern course toward Mill Creek. By day, the forest was merely a forest. By night, Thompson never explicitly states what pursued them in the darkness. He only writes, "They are not gone. They are never gone. They found way through, and now they walk among us. They look like men, but they are not men, and they are spreading." The document concludes with a cryptic warning. If you encounter a man who does not cast a shadow at noon, who does not blink in strong wind, who speaks your name as if learning how the word tastes, run. Do not look back. Do not respond when he calls after you. What wears a skin is not a man at all. Theodore Blackwood became convinced Thompson's account. while perhaps distorted by trauma and time, contain elements of truth. His research notes reveal an increasing preoccupation with verifying specific details. He consulted geological surveys to confirm the presence of cave systems in the area. He interviewed elderly residents about local folklore predating the Blackwater Creek incident. He even compiled a list of unsolved disappearances in the Bitterroot Range dating back to the earliest European explorations. Most significantly, Blackwood attempted to locate descendants of the 18 men who had vanished. He found none. No death certificates, no estate records, no mentions in family Bibles or church registries. It was as if they had never existed beyond their names on Hulkcom's expedition roster. Blackwood's faculty advisor, Professor Lawrence Merritt, became increasingly concerned about his students' erratic behavior. In a letter to the department chair dated May 12, 1963, Merritt wrote, "Blackwood has abandoned all pretense of academic objectivity. He speaks of the Blackwater incident as if it were occurring in the present rather than 80 years past. He reports unusual sounds outside his apartment at night. He has taken to carrying a sidearm, claiming it contains silver bullets. Though I suspect this is merely a bizarre joke, I recommend a leave of absence." Before any action could be taken, Blackwood departed Seattle for Montana. His last known communication was a postcard to Merritt, dated June 7, 1963. "Leaving tomorrow for the Bitterroot Range. Have coordinates for the camp location. Will verify Thompson's account directly. If I do not return by July 1st, notify the Sheriff's Department in Missoula." University records indicate Blackwood departed Seattle on June 8, 1963. He never returned. A search party later found his abandoned campsite 3 weeks afterward. His research materials, including Thompson's account, were recovered intact, but Blackwood himself was never located. The University of Washington's Department of History officially closed Blackwood's case in September 1963, listing him as missing, presumed deceased due to wilderness accident. His research was archived, largely forgotten, until 1968, when Professor Marion Leech discovered it while organizing departmental records. Intrigued, Leech conducted her own investigation. Unlike Blackwood, she never ventured into the field. Instead, she focused on historical records and interviews with locals in the Bitterroot region. Her findings revealed a disturbing pattern. The area surrounding Blackwater Creek had been the site of multiple disappearances stretching back to the earliest European explorations. French trappers in the 1820s referred to it as La Forêt Caprende, the forest that takes. Native legend spoke of a thin place where the boundary between worlds could be crossed under certain conditions. Most significantly, Leech discovered that the 9 survivors of 1883 were not the only ones who emerged in the forest that season. Between March and October that year, 11 strangers appeared in settlements throughout Montana Territory. Men with no history in the region. Men who could not or would not account for their origins. Men who, according to local records, exhibited peculiar behaviors and mannerisms. Leech compiled a list of these individuals from territorial records, newspaper accounts, and church registries. Among them, John Smith, almost certainly an assumed name, appeared in Helena in April 1883, described in police reports as speaking in a monotone and standing motionless for hours, arrested for vagrancy but escaped custody. No subsequent record. Thomas Green, who arrived in Butte in May 1883 and established himself as a barber. Customers reported he rarely blinked and breathed only when speaking. His shop was found abandoned in October 1883. No further record. William Jones, who took position as schoolteacher in a small settlement near present-day Missoula in September 1883. School records note his unusual stillness and tendency to watch children without speaking. He disappeared after parents complained of their children's nightmares. No subsequent record. The pattern was consistent. Men who appeared suddenly, exhibiting unusual behaviors, integrated briefly into nearby communities, then vanishing without explanation. Leech uncovered similar cases across neighboring territories and states in the following years, suggesting a gradual dispersal from the original site. Her research culminated in a monograph titled Echoes from Blackwater: Displacement and Identity in Frontier Catastrophe. The university declined to publish her work, citing methodological concerns. In 1969, Leech resigned her position. Her subsequent whereabouts remain unknown. The final document in the University of Washington archive connected to Blackwater Creek incident is a letter from Edward Thompson, son of survivor Isaac Thompson, addressed to Professor Leech. It is dated July 1969. It reads in part, asterisk, "Your inquiry into my father's account has caused me considerable distress. I had hoped this document would remain unread as he wished. Now that its contents are known, I feel compelled to share one final detail. In his later years, my father became convinced he was being watched. He installed locks on every door and window of his home. He refused to leave the house after sunset. On the night before his death, he called me to his bedside and whispered, 'They've found me at last.' The ones who took Schmidt and the others, they still wear their faces, though 50 years have passed. I dismissed this as a delirium of a dying man. But now, having read your summary of his written account, I am less certain. Last week, I saw a man standing across the street from my house. He remained motionless for hours, watching. When a neighbor approached him, he gave his name as Peter Schmidt, the same name as one of the men who vanished in 1883. My neighbor thought nothing of it, but I remembered my father's words. Tomorrow, I am leaving town. I urge you to abandon this line of research. Asterisk, the Blackwater Creek incident has since faded from public memory. The land was incorporated into a national forest in the early 20th century, and modern maps no longer mark Blackwater Creek by name. The exact location of the hunting camp and the cave described by Thompson remains unknown. Yet, from time to time, reports emerge that echo the original tragedy. In 1922, a 5-man lumber survey team disappeared while assessing timber resources. In 1947, 3 hikers vanished from a marked trail, their equipment neatly arranged beside the path. In 1958, a family of 4 went missing during a camping trip. Their vehicle was discovered with a flat tire along a Forest Service road turnout. Records from the 1940s through the 1960s describe strange animal behavior in the area, birds falling silent in mid-song, game animals abandoning familiar grounds, predators avoiding certain sectors without reason. Rangers often requested transfers. Several reported hearing voices in the woods, particularly at dusk. Officially, these were dismissed as the effect of isolation and stress. In 1965, a geological survey was conducted as part of a resource study. The team's report included a curious footnote: anomalous acoustic properties observed in Sector G7. Sound appears to reflect in unpredictable patterns, creating the impression of voices where none exist. Recommend further study by qualified specialists. No follow-up study was ever conducted. In 1967, an internal memo from the U.S. Forest Service noted evidence of unauthorized excavation in the same area, fresh digging that appeared to target a cave system. No permits for exploration had been issued. Patrols were increased, but no suspects were identified. So what truly became of the 18 men who vanished from the Blackwater Creek hunting camp in 1883? The official explanation, harsh weather or possible conflict with native tribes, barely withstands scrutiny. The survivors' contradictory accounts suggest a deliberate effort to conceal something. Thompson's testimony, though colored by trauma or instability, aligns with local legends and later events in ways that cannot be easily ignored. Most unsettling of all is the implication in Thompson's final writings that what the men encountered in the forest did not remain there. His words suggest a spreading presence, a threat not confined to a remote wilderness, but one capable of appearing anywhere. They look like men, but they are not men, he wrote. Was this a warning, a delusion, or a record of an ongoing infiltration? One final document deserves mention. In 1967, during routine maintenance at the Montana Historical Society archives, staff discovered a forgotten letter. It appeared to have been written by Jeremiah Hulkcom shortly before his death in 1885, addressed to the territorial governor but never delivered. It contained only a single paragraph. "I write not to confess, but to warn. We brought something back with us, not in our hands or our packs, but in our minds. A door once open cannot be closed. They watch me even now as I write. They were familiar faces, Schmidt, Cooper, Roberts, and the others. They linger at the edges of my vision, patient, expectant. They know I will join them soon. But before I do, you must understand this. They are not bound to forest any longer. They walk your streets. They sit in your churches and your council meetings. They may with the faces of those you love. Trust nothing. Trust no one. The door stands open, and they are still coming through." The letter was quietly filed away, dismissed as the ravings of a dying man. But when read alongside Thompson's words and the patterns uncovered by Blackwood and Leech, it takes on a far more chilling significance. An ominous chapter unfolds in 1968. Police records in Seattle document the arrest of a man identifying himself as Theodore Blackwood, detained for disturbing the peace. The arresting officer's report reads, "Subject was accosting pedestrians, claiming he had returned from Montana after 5 years in the forest. Subject appeared disoriented, malnourished, clothing tattered, yet paradoxically clean, as if freshly dawned. When questioned about his identity, subject grew agitated, repeating, 'I am not Blackwood. Blackwood is gone.' He was remanded to Western State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. Hospital records indicate he was released after only 3 days, deemed no threat to himself or others. The examining physician noted, patient exhibits unusual speech patterns, frequently pausing mid-sentence as though listening to unheard voices. Maintains fixed stare without blinking for unsettling durations. Claims to be Theodore Blackwood, yet demonstrates no knowledge of his academic work or personal history. After his release, the man disappeared. No university records show that anyone claiming to be Blackwood contacted the institution. His family, interviewed in 1970, confirmed they had not heard from him since his disappearance in 1963. Yet, local newspapers reported sporadic sightings. In 1971, the Seattle Times published a brief article titled, "Missing Professor Spotted Downtown." Witnesses described a gaunt figure in outdated clothing, standing motionless for hours outside the University of Washington Library, claiming to be Theodore Blackwood. Campus security, when alerted, found no one. The forest remains. Blackwater Creek, though renamed, still flows. The cave, if it exists, has never been officially located. 27 men entered the wilderness in December 1882. Only 9 returned. What became of the other 18 and what may have emerged in their place remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of the American frontier. In 1972, Park Ranger David Corbin filed an unusual incident report while patrolling what is now the Lolo National Forest, the area believed to encompass the Blackwater Creek camp. Corbin described meeting an elderly man in outdated clothing at a remote trailhead. The man introduced himself as Peter Schmidt and said he was waiting for companions to return from their trap lines. When Corbin pointed out that trapping was illegal in the National Forest, the man smiled and replied, "The forest has its own rules." As Corbin reached for his radio, the man vanished. A search revealed no tracks leaving the site. Corbin's report concluded with a chilling, personal note. Subject's manner deeply unsettling. Maintained unbroken eye contact. Spoke in monotone. Skin appeared waxy, almost artificial under flashlight. Request permission to avoid solo patrols in this sector. Permission was granted. Corbin transferred to Yellowstone the following year. Other reports followed. In 1985, hunters described men standing motionless among the trees at dusk. dressed like 19th century trappers. They watched silently. When approached, the figures retreated with unnatural speed and uncanny coordination. The hunters abandoned their trip, saying even their horses had been spooked. In 1994, college students on a weekend hike reported hearing voices calling from off-trail near sunset. One student separated from the group to investigate and vanished. 2 days later, search teams found him, disoriented, suffering from exposure, and with no memory of where he'd been. Rescuers noted he repeated a single phrase. They were familiar faces, but they are not who they appear to be. Perhaps most unsettling was discovery in 2002 during construction of Fire Access Road. Workers unearthed the foundation of a cabin 10 miles from the nearest known historical settlement. Archaeological analysis dated it to the late 19th century. Among the artifacts recovered was a metal button engraved with the initials PS, possibly linking it to Peter Schmidt, one of the vanished trappers. The report also noted that the cabin had been deliberately burned, the fire clearly set from within. In the decades since Blackwood's disappearance, the Bitterroot Range has been mapped, logged, and studied extensively. Yet still, local guides warn against camping near unmarked streams. Forest Service employees rotate out of the district at unusually high rates, and hikers occasionally report strange encounters. Familiar voices calling from dense brush, figures glimpsed between trees, moving in ways that seem almost but not quite human. In 2013, documentary filmmaker Rachel Carter began investigating the Blackwater Creek mystery for a planned series on unsolved historical events. Her notes reveal a careful, methodical approach. Interviews with local historians, consultations with archives, scouting expeditions in the Lolo National Forest. Her final email sent to her producer on September 18, 2013. The story takes its final, haunting turn with Rachel Carter. Her last email, dated September 18, 2013, reads, "Think I've located the actual site of the Blackwater camp. Matches Hulkcom's descriptions perfectly. Planning final scout tomorrow with a local guide. If it checks out, we'll start filming next week." Carter never returned from that scouting trip. Her rental car was later found at a trailhead parking area, locked, untouched, her camera gear missing. The guide she was scheduled to meet claimed she never arrived. Search operations stretched on for 2 weeks, but were abandoned after early snowfall. When they resumed in the spring of 2014, no trace of Rachel Carter was found. 3 months later, however, a video appeared on her professional YouTube channel. The shaky footage opens at dusk in a dense forest. A woman's voice, presumably Carter, narrates, "Day 3 of solo search. I think I found it." These foundations match Hulkcom's journal perfectly. The camera pans across crumbling stone structures, choked with vines. Then her voice lowers. "There's something else here. A structure not marked on any maps." The lens tilts toward a rocky outcropping. An opening. Darkness. Carter's voice grows excited. "This has to be the cave Thompson described. Supposedly collapsed in 1883, but it's here. I'm going in." The footage plunges into shadow. The cave walls glow under the weak light of the camera, marked with strange etchings. Carter whispers. "The markings, they shift when I change angles," just like Thompson wrote. The camera jolts, as if she stumbles. For an instant, a stone structure is visible deep inside, a freestanding rectangle carved into the rock. Carter gasps. The camera crashes to the floor, filming only stone and dust. For 30 seconds, the microphone picks up ragged breathing, hurried footsteps, and a faint chorus of voices, distant yet uncomfortably near. Then silence. The video continues for 10 minutes of black screen. Audio specialists later confirmed faint noises throughout, footsteps, whispers, and vocal tones not clearly human. In the final seconds, a hushed phrase is heard, interpreted by many as, "They're wearing our faces now." Within 24 hours, YouTube removed the video for disturbing content. Copies survive only in online archives. Law enforcement trace the upload, but never determine who accessed Carter's account. Her case remains unsolved. The survivors of Blackwater Creek may have carried something out of the forest. Not artifacts, but a secret. A secret so terrible it shadowed their lives until death. What that secret truly was, mere trauma, or something beyond explanation, remains uncertain. What is certain is this. 27 men entered the wilderness in 1882. 9 emerged, and in the years that followed, strangers appeared in settlements across Montana. Men who looked human, yet were subtly, irredeemably wrong. In 2018, a hiker discovered a cairn-like stone arrangement in a remote sector of the Lolo National Forest. Beneath the central stone was a corroded metal container. Inside lay a deteriorated handwritten note. Much of the text was illegible, but fragments remained. Found the cave again despite collapse. They continue to come through where our faces, but cannot perfectly mimic, must recognize them by their stillness, their fixed gaze. I do not trust even familiar faces in the forest. The note was signed TB, possibly Theodore Blackwood, but water damage made handwriting analysis inconclusive. The location was just 15 miles from where Blackwood's camp had been discovered in 1963. The Forest Service employee who first examined the note requested a transfer the very next week. In his exit interview, he offered only this: some things are better left unspoken. Interest in Blackwater Creek has surged in recent years. Paranormal forums are filled with speculation. Some dismiss it all as hoaxes, bear attacks, misperceptions, or tribal conflicts. Others whisper of alien abduction, interdimensional rifts, or possession. Most disturbing are the contemporary accounts. Since 2010, dozens of hikers and campers have reported experiences eerily consistent with the 19th century accounts. Voices calling from the brush, figures in outdated clothing standing motionless at dusk, movements that mimic humanity, yet fall just outside of it. In 2021, researchers from the University of Montana conducted a limited archaeological survey at the supposed site of the Blackwater camp. Their preliminary findings confirmed 19th century habitation, cabin foundations, traces of burning, but no human remains. The survey ended abruptly. Dr. Rebecca Stern, the lead archaeologist, later explained, "Something about that place that affected us." 3 veteran researchers reported the same symptoms: voices calling their names, movement glimpsed at the edges of sight, overwhelming dread. I've worked across North America for 20 years and never experienced anything like it. We took our samples and left. None of us would ever return. The samples collected included soil from the cabin foundations, fragments of burned wood, rusted metal objects, and stone from a nearby cave entrance. Preliminary analysis of the cave stone revealed unusual properties. Microscopic patterns that seemed to shift depending on the angle of observation, consistent with both Thompson's account and Blackwood's notes. Further study was abandoned after 2 laboratory technicians reported headaches and auditory hallucinations following prolonged exposure to the samples. All materials were subsequently sealed and placed in secured storage at the university. Dr. Stern's request for a more comprehensive investigation was denied. The official reason cited was budgetary constraints. Unofficially, colleagues reported that university administrators had received concerning information from federal agencies regarding the site. They may walk among us still. The forest keeps its secrets. The door, once open, remains ajar. And somewhere in the dense woods of the Bitterroot Range, the echo of what happened at Blackwater Creek in the winter of 1883 continues to resonate, a warning unheeded, a mystery unsolved, a horror undimmed by the passage of time. In 2022, a hiker reported a strange encounter to Forest Service personnel. While resting at a remote stream crossing, he observed a man in old-fashioned clothing standing motionless on the opposite bank. When approached, the man identified himself as Jeremiah Hulkcom and claimed to be waiting for my men to return from their trapping lines. The hiker, unaware of the historical significance of the name, thought little of it until he mentioned the encounter to a ranger who recognized the name immediately. A subsequent check of the area found no tracks or evidence of another person's presence. The ranger's report concluded it as a possible case of mistaken identity or fabrication. Or perhaps the witness had encountered an individual with knowledge of local history engaging in a historical reenactment. No further action was deemed necessary. The report was filed and forgotten, but the questions remain. What if the 18 men who vanished in 1883 never truly left the forest? What if whatever took their place continues to exist, wearing borrowed faces, mimicking human behavior just accurately enough to pass casual inspection? What if Thompson's warning, "They look like men, but they are not men," was not delusion, but desperate truth? The Blackwater Creek incident offers no definitive answers, only disturbing possibilities. In the absence of conclusive evidence, each of us must decide how much credence to give the accounts of traumatized survivors, obsessed researchers, and modern witnesses. Perhaps the explanation is mundane. The psychological effects of isolation, the unreliability of historical records, the human tendency to find patterns and build stories from coincidence. Or perhaps something truly inexplicable occurred in those woods, something that continues to ripple outward through time, touching lives far removed from the original event. Perhaps the door Thompson described remains open, a passage between worlds that was never successfully closed. Listen carefully in the silence between heartbeats. Their voices might be calling your name. And if you hear them, if you feel drawn toward the dense shadows between ancient trees, remember Thompson's final warning. If you encounter a man who does not cast a shadow at noon, who does not blink in strong wind, who speaks your name as if tasting the word for first time, run. Do not look back. Do not respond when he calls after you. What wears a skin is not a man at all. For the 27 men who entered the Montana wilderness in 1883, what began as a routine expedition ended in mystery and horror. Only 9 returned, forever changed by their experience. The other 18 vanished into history, or perhaps into something far stranger. Their true fate remains unknown, their story a disturbing footnote in the chronicles of the American frontier. The forest remains. Blackwater Creek, though renamed, continues to flow. And somewhere in the dense woods of the Bitterroot Range, something watches and waits. Something that wears familiar faces. Something that calls with familiar voices. Something that entered our world through a door that should have remained closed. 27 men entered the forest in 1883. Only 9 walked out. The others, they may be closer than you think.